Okay, let's unpack this. We are embarking on a deep dive into a state that has arguably the strongest, most defined, unofficial brand identity in the nation. I mean, it's right there, proudly displayed on its license plate.
That's right. We are diving deep into Missouri, the show me state.
Hmm.
And this famous motto, this expression of, non-credulous, wary skepticism, it's iconic. But what's so fascinating is that the sources point to not one, but two distinct and honestly equally compelling origins for the phrase.
I find that duality so reflective of the state itself, the whole idea that I'm from Missouri, you have got to show me. It just captures this essence of demanding proof, right? Refusing to be swayed by just words.
Right. So the first origin, and this is certainly the one you hear cited most often in political lore, it dates back to a speech. It was given by Congressman Willard Van Diver in Philadelphia back in 1899.
Uh-huh.
He was speaking to a Naval Affairs Committee, and he was getting frustrated with all the smooth talk and big promises. So he expressed his profound skepticism by stating quite memorably, "I'm from Missouri, and you have got to show me."
And just like that, it became this defining statement. Skepticism toward authority, intellectual independence, all of it.
Exactly. It immediately connects the state's identity to a sort of political wariness. But the second origin story is completely separate. It gives the phrase this gritty, blue-collar foundation. It's rooted in labor and, well, learning a new skill.
Oh, this is the one about the miners.
Precisely. This involves Missouri miners who were sent west to Leadville, Colorado. They were there to replace striking workers in the hard rock mines. The thing is, the techniques used in Leadville, handling hard gold and silver ore, operating specific machinery, it was all completely foreign to the Missouri men. They were used to soft ore lead mining.
So they needed constant on-the-job training, step by step.
They did. And the Colorado pit bosses, they got frustrated. They were constantly having to stop and walk the new crew through every single step. So they reportedly started muttering, "That man is from Missouri, you'll have to show him."
So it started as almost an insult, a term of frustration.
It did. It was a slight, implying a lack of skill. But it was quickly adopted back home as a sign of practicality.
Yeah.
The refusal to pretend you know something when you don't. It became a virtue.
Yeah.
Demanding proof, demanding to be taught correctly.
So whether it's political skepticism against frothy eloquence or vocational necessity demanding practical instruction, the core idea is the same. Insist on proof. Show me. Our mission today is to really get to the bottom of this crossroads state, a place that somehow blends elements of the Midwestern heartland with these deep traditions of the upland South.
It really is a blend. We're going to explore its complex history, its surprising geography as the cave state, its unique economic structure, and its wildly contrasting cultural policies.
Okay, so to set the stage, let's get the quick facts out of the way. Geographically, Missouri is significant.
Very. It ranks 21st in land area, but its location is critical. It borders 8 different states. 8. A figure that's only equaled by Tennessee. Its capital is Jefferson City, but the real economic and cultural power that's concentrated in St. Louis, Kansas City, Springfield, and Columbia.
And before we move on, we have to talk about the name itself, Missouri. It's a true linguistic marker of its internal identity.
The name is derived from the indigenous Missouria, which was a Siouan language tribe. Their name translates to something like people of the wooded canoes.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
And then French colonists later adapted that name from an Illinois language term, Wimizurita, meaning one who has dug out canoes.
A wonderful recognition of life on the rivers, but the pronunciation. That's where the division begins. You hear the traditional Midwestern Mizuri.
And then you hear the more southern-inflected Mizuri. It sounds like a minor thing, but it's a political minefield.
It really is. And the sources highlight how deep this goes. It's not like some other states where there's a clear right or wrong. No one can definitively say one is purely native or purely outsider or rural versus urban. The division is historical and it's regional.
And the politicians exploit this. It's incredible. They use what our sources call the linguistic hedge. Sometimes they'll consciously use both pronunciations in a single speech, pivoting from Mizuri to Mizur to try and signal authenticity to this broader, culturally segmented electorate.
It's the ultimate reflection of the state's internal duality, right there in how they say the name.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start with the deep history, and we need to go back much, much further than the French. Our sources confirm continuous human habitation in this region for at least 12,000 years.
Right, and that's all backed up by extensive archaeological digs along the major river valleys. That antiquity provides the foundation. But the most dramatic ancient chapter, that belongs to the Mississippian culture. This was a highly sophisticated pre-Columbian civilization that emerged before 1000 CE. This was not a primitive society. They developed these centralized political and religious centers.
The most famous example, of course, is just across the Mississippi River at Cahokia in what's now Illinois. But St. Louis itself was a major satellite center. This is the era of the massive earthwork mounds.
Platform mounds for temples or the chief's residence, ridgetop mounds, conical burial shapes. I mean, they were constructed for religious, political, and social purposes.
And Cahokia was, for a time, the largest city in North America north of Mexico. Its influence was immense.
It became the central hub of this vast, complex, regional trading network that ran from the Great Lakes all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. This sophisticated civilization managed trade, agriculture, political administration. It was on an impressive scale.
And the tragic fact is that St. Louis was once actually named Mound City by European Americans, just because of the sheer number of surviving prehistoric mounds.
It's heartbreaking. As St. Louis industrialized and expanded through the 19th century, nearly all of these irreplaceable historical landmarks were just destroyed, leveled to make way for urban development.
A powerful illustration of cultural erasure.
And the Mississippian civilization itself was already in decline by 1400 CE. Most of its descendants had dispersed or migrated before the Europeans even arrived.
The French were the first Europeans to claim the area. They named the entire massive region Louisiana, and they established settlements in what they called the Illinois country on both sides of the Mississippi.
And the first permanent European settlement in what is now Missouri wasn't St. Louis, it was St. Genevieve, founded around 1750. These were French Canadians, often called Creoles, and they were migrating west across the river because the intensive commercial agriculture they practiced on the East Bank had just exhausted the soil there.
And this early economy was heavily reliant on forced labor. Slavery was central to the fur trade and to commercial agriculture, and it involved both enslaved Africans and Native Americans.
St. Genevieve's role was absolutely critical to the larger French colony. They became a major agricultural supplier. They shipped surplus wheat, corn, tobacco, all of it, downriver to feed the population of lower Louisiana and New Orleans. It was the breadbasket of the colony.
St. Louis was founded a bit later, 1764, by French fur traders Gilbert Antoine de Saint-Maxent, Pierre Leclerc, and Auguste Chouteau.
And St. Louis quickly eclipsed St. Genevieve. Its location was just superior, right there near the confluence of the Missouri and Mississippi rivers. It became the undisputed central hub of the vast regional fur trade, with trappers pushing deep into the Louisiana Purchase territory.
And all that business volume made St. Louis an early financial center for the developing West.
And the city's future as this global financial and trade center was basically cemented after the invention of the steamboat in the early 1800s. That just drastically increased river commerce. But before the U.S. took over, there was that brief interlude of Spanish rule.
A fascinating period. From 1764 to 1803, the land west of the Mississippi was controlled by Spain. It was part of the Viceroyalty of New Spain.
It was. And while the territory was nominally Spanish, the economy, the culture, the language, it all remained largely French Creole. Spanish rule mostly just meant new administrative and land grant regulations. The French financial interests, they continued to dominate.
And then the region becomes part of the U.S. with the 1803 Louisiana Purchase. And that is when the area truly earns its most famous historical nickname, the Gateway to the West.
And that gateway, it wasn't just figurative. It was the literal staging ground for the most important American exploration mission. St. Charles, just upriver from St. Louis, was both the starting and return point for the Lewis and Clark expedition in 1804.
And for the next 4 decades, St. Louis served as the irreplaceable major supply point for waves of American settlers heading west. Oregon Trail, Santa Fe Trail, California Trail. The entire logistics chain for Manifest Destiny basically began right there.
But as the population boomed, the push for statehood brought immediate acute conflict, and it revolved entirely around slavery.
When Missouri was admitted as the 24th state on August 10, 1821, it was the result of a political bombshell, the Missouri Compromise. It was admitted as a slave state, balanced by Maine being admitted as a free state.
And the nature of the early settlement really explains this tension. Most American migrants came from the upland, South Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, and they brought enslaved people with them. They settled predominantly in this flat, fertile stretch of 17 counties along the Missouri River, which became known as Little Dixie.
Right, and that was a region highly conducive to plantation agriculture. It was culturally, economically, and politically Southern. That initial concentration of Southern culture and economics set the enduring internal fault lines.
We should also note the sheer scale of the state back then. It was initially the largest state in the Union until the boundaries were formalized.
And the boundaries were adjusted later, right?
They were, most notably with the Platte Purchase in 1836. That added 6 counties to the northwest corner by making the Missouri River the boundary north of the Kansas River, a crucial addition of fertile land.
And speaking of early instability, we can't skip the massive foundational trauma of the 1811-1812 New Madrid earthquakes.
These were among the largest earthquakes ever recorded in North America. I mean, they created this profound, lasting impact on the land and the consciousness of the population. Contemporary reports say the shocks caused church bells to ring as far away as Boston.
And it caused the Mississippi River to flow backward. I mean, can you even imagine that?
Briefly, yes.
Yeah.
The quakes permanently reshaped the topography, creating new lakes and these vast, swampy areas in the Boot Heel region.
There was also that short, strange border dispute with Iowa, the Honeylands conflict.
It sounds comical now, doesn't it? But it was a serious territorial disagreement over a vaguely defined boundary line. It flared up when a Missouri sheriff crossed the line to collect taxes.
And the area was nicknamed the Honeylands because of the abundance of wild honey.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Troops were mobilized on both sides. The only casualty was supposedly a pig. But the border issue had to be settled later by the Supreme Court. It just shows how territorial and sensitive the state was during its formation.
So the decades leading up to the Civil War saw the population nearly double every 10 years, between the 1830s and the 1860s, and that brought those cultural tensions to a boil.
The Mormon War of 1838 is a key internal conflict here. Mormon migrants, seeking religious freedom, settled in the northern parts of the state. They were primarily from northern and midwestern states and were often anti-slavery.
Which immediately put them at odds with the old settlers, who were largely from the South and intensely pro-slavery.
The conflict quickly escalated over land, religion, politics, and it resulted in violence. By 1839, it had grown so severe that Governor Lilburn Boggs issued the infamous Extermination Order.
Extermination Order.
It formally authorized the militia to treat Mormons as enemies and force their removal from the state. It stands as one of the darkest chapters in Missouri history.
And this cultural tension was just compounded by massive European immigration, especially the Germans who started arriving in the late 1840s and 50s.
These German immigrants were often educated, middle class, and strongly anti-slavery. They established highly successful communities, particularly the wine industry, along the Missouri Rhineland. That's a region along the Missouri River west of St. Louis. They also founded the major breweries that would make St. Louis world famous, most notably Anheuser-Busch. Their political leanings were largely with the Republican Unionist cause.
But the sources also point to a competing immigrant group, the Irish.
Yes, many Irish immigrants, concentrated in the cities and competing for low-skilled labor jobs, were often strongly pro-slavery. Their reasoning was purely economic. They were terrified that if enslaved African Americans were emancipated, they would flood the labor market and drastically drive down wages for all unskilled workers.
So you have this incredibly complex, culturally polarized environment, fault lines running through natives and immigrants, rural and urban, north and south. It was a powder keg. And that polarization made Missouri's role in the Civil War absolutely devastating. As a border state, it never formally seceded, but its division was immediate and violent.
A special state convention voted against secession, but this support for the Union was deeply qualified. It was conditional. The crisis kicked off almost immediately after Fort Sumter with the Camp Jackson affair in St. Louis in May 1861.
This event is so critical because it just crystallized that internal division. The pro-Southern governor, Claiborne F. Jackson, had secretly mobilized the state militia at Camp Jackson. He'd reportedly requested heavy arms from the Confederacy to secure the St. Louis arsenal.
And Union General Nathaniel Lyon, supported heavily by the German immigrant militias who were intensely Unionist, he acted preemptively. Lyon surrounded the camp and forced the state militia to surrender.
But here's where the tactical blunder happens, and the tragedy. Lyon marched the captured militia, who were primarily local citizens, through the streets of St. Louis, guarded by his largely German-speaking troops.
The citizens, many of whom were pro-secession, they saw this as a deliberate provocation, an occupation. Violence erupted, escalating into a fatal riot that killed dozens of civilians and Union soldiers. The Camp Jackson affair instantly turned St. Louis into a war zone and cemented the state's internal schism.
And this event immediately leads to rival governments. Governor Jackson, after being chased from Jefferson City, calls a secession session in Neosho, which was then recognized by the Confederacy.
At the same time, the remaining state convention, which favored the Union, declared the offices vacant and installed Hamilton Gamble as the new pro-Union governor, and he was immediately recognized by President Lincoln.
So you have a state with two capitals and two governments, one Union, one Confederate.
Exactly. And once regular Confederate forces retreated after early battles like Wilson's Creek, the conflict just evolved. It became years of vicious, unregulated guerrilla warfare, a style of fighting that was really unique to the Missouri-Kansas borderlands.
A brutal conflict characterized by the bushwhackers. These citizen soldiers, or insurgents, like Captain William Quantrill, Frank and Jesse James, the Younger brothers.
And they pioneered devastating small unit tactics. They used speed and local knowledge to launch these terrifying raids and ambushes against Union garrisons and civilians.
And the myth-making started right away. The James brothers, who began their careers as Confederate guerrillas, later leveraged this history when they became bank and train robbers. These stories were heavily romanticized into the enduring American Robin Hood myth, a narrative of anti-authority resistance that still resonates today.
Moving beyond the war, Missouri went through this massive, profound identity transformation. It transitioned from its foundation as a rural southern slave state into a hybrid industrial, service, and agricultural Midwestern state.
And the primary catalyst for that shift was infrastructure. The rapid expansion of railroads after the war just fundamentally reoriented the state's economy. It transformed Kansas City into this colossal transportation and commercial hub.
And that expansion attracted a massive new wave of Midwestern migrants from Ohio, Illinois, Iowa, who eventually outnumbered the state's original southern-descended population. The state's center of gravity shifted definitively westward and northward.
The rail infrastructure, specifically the development of the refrigerated boxcar, that's what fueled the explosion of Kansas City's meatpacking boom.
Well, the sources reveal this logistical marvel. The Texas cattle drives, which previously ended in Kansas cow towns, they shifted their focus. They started shipping their herds by rail directly to Kansas City.
So KC becomes a massive processing center.
It becomes the link between the Western ranching economy and the dense consumer markets of the East. This industrial powerhouse status led to KC's prominence in the first half of the 20th century.
And the result was an architectural boom. Downtown Kansas City became famous for its stylish Art Deco skyscrapers, reflecting its stature as a major American industrial city.
And this era also saw profound political shifts during the Progressive Era, roughly 1890s through the 1920s. This was an attempt to modernize and, clean up the politics and industries of the state.
You're thinking of Governor Joseph Holy Joe Folk, who championed the Missouri idea?
That's it. This was the notion that public morality could be achieved through popular control and strict law enforcement against corrupt politicians and businesses.
And Folk was incredibly successful. Progressive legislation was passed that established mechanisms for direct democracy, the initiative and referendum provision, alongside new regulations for child labor, food safety, business practices, and utilities. It was a serious, sustained effort to move away from the post-Civil War corruption and establish modern governance.
But, mirroring the fate of many older industrial centers, the mid-1950s and 60s brought significant economic pain.
Deindustrialization.
St. Louis and Kansas City suffered massive deindustrialization, compounded by the loss of rail and manufacturing jobs. This hit the core cities hard. At the same time, Highway Construction St. Charles actually claims the distinction of hosting the first interstate project in 1956 that just accelerated suburban flight.
And those core cities went through decades of painful contraction. But the sources show a promising 21st century rebirth driven by targeted investment.
Absolutely. Both metro areas have seen intensive downtown redevelopment. You've got Kansas City's Power and Light District, St. Louis's Ballpark Village, massive renovation projects breathing new life into historical buildings. KC's new residential towers, like the 3 light apartments, signal new urban living, and St. Louis's new MLS expansion team, St. Louis City SC, has driven significant adjacent development.
And a major institutional anchor was secured for Kansas City's modern economy, the relocation of federal agencies.
This was a huge move. The U.S. Department of Agriculture decided to move the Economic Research Service, or ERS, and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, NIFA, to downtown Kansas City. And that provides hundreds of high-wage, stable federal jobs and cements the city's role as a key agricultural policy center, a massive economic anchor in the core city.
The state's cultural complexity is clear, but let's look at the bedrock that supports all of this. the physical landscape and the core economy it enables. Missouri is defined by its two colossal rivers, the Mississippi to the east and the Missouri River, which snakes from west to east, acting as this natural corridor connecting Kansas City and St. Louis.
And the topography creates a striking geographic divide. North of the Missouri River, you have the northern plains rolling hills sculpted by ancient glaciation, creating these rich, deep soils, perfect for large-scale row crop farming.
But south of the river, the landscape changes dramatically. That's the Ozark Mountains region.
The Ozarks are fascinating. They aren't true mountains, but rather an incredibly ancient uplifted plateau. It's a massive, deeply eroded tableland, and it surrounds the even older Precambrian igneous St. Francois Mountains. The terrain is rugged, heavily wooded, and defined by a very specific geological feature, karst topography.
And that leads directly to the cave state nickname. Karst means the underlying bedrock has a high limestone content. It's easily dissolved by slightly acidic groundwater, which leads to sinkholes and, critically, caves.
And we're not talking about just a handful of caves. Missouri has over 7,300 recorded caves.
7,300.
It places it second only to Tennessee nationally. This network of subterranean spaces is immense. It attracts cavers, biologists, tourists. Perry County in the southeastern Ozarks has the highest concentration and the state's single longest map cave system. Places like the Marama Caverns are world-famous tourist attractions.
And then you have the completely anomalous geographical outlier, which looks like it belongs in Arkansas or Louisiana, the Boot Heel.
The Boot Heel, in the southeastern corner, is a remnant of that dramatic seismic activity from the New Madrid quakes. It's the lowest, flattest, warmest, and wettest part of the state, benefiting from rich alluvial soil.
And that climate makes it suitable for commercial crops you usually associate with the Deep South.
Precisely. It's ideal for growing cotton and rice, illustrating how Missouri's climate diversity allows it to bridge Deep South agriculture with Midwestern corn and soy.
That interior location, far from oceans or high mountain ranges, also subjects Missouri to some pretty extreme weather events.
The climate is generally humid continental, so you get cool or cold winters and hot, humid, very wet summers. Only the Boot Heel dips into a true humid subtropical classification. And because the state is located where cold Arctic air masses frequently collide with warm, moist air streaming up from the Gulf of Mexico, the temperature swings are wild and the potential for severe weather is immense.
And being firmly in Tornado Alley, the history of catastrophic tornadoes in Missouri is significant.
The sources detail two particularly devastating examples. More recently, the May 22, 2011 EF5 tornado that destroyed Joplin was one of the deadliest in U.S. history. It killed 158 people and caused up to $3 billion in damages.
But going back, the 1896 St. Louis tornado was a catastrophe on an entirely different scale.
That storm was one of the worst in American history. It killed at least 255 people and caused massive destruction that, if you adjust for inflation, would equate to over $5.7 billion in today's dollars. The severity of these storms just underscores the vulnerability inherent in the state's mid-continent location.
Moving to the economic engine, Missouri is without a doubt an agricultural powerhouse.
The output is incredible. Beef, soybeans, pork, corn, hay, poultry, cotton, rice, and eggs. It demonstrates how Missouri manages to encompass multiple agricultural profiles, and the sheer scale is noteworthy. Missouri ranks second only to Texas in the number of farms, with 108,000.
Wow.
It also ranks nationally in the top 5 for soybeans, 7th for cattle, 6th for hogs, and 4th for rice production, thanks largely to the Boot Heel.
But the earth gives up mineral wealth, too. Missouri is a major mining state.
It's defined by its resources. The state extracts vast quantities of limestone, and significantly, it ranks first among all states in lead production, with most of those mines concentrated in the old lead belt area of the eastern Ozarks. It's also a leading producer of lime, which is a key raw material for Portland cement.
Energy-wise, coal is still dominant, but there are other players.
Coal generated about 82% of the state's electricity as recently as 2011, though that percentage has started to decrease. The state also operates the Callaway nuclear plant, which supplies about 10% of the state's power. And while it's still small, the capacity for wind and solar is growing, with about 141 megawatts of solar installed as of 2016.
Okay, here's a detail that just reveals how fundamentally central Missouri has been to the national economy. The Federal Reserve anomaly.
This is a truly unique historical finding. Missouri is the only state in the Union to host two main Federal Reserve banks, one in St. Louis and one in Kansas City.
That's such a powerful confirmation of its location, spanning the western and eastern economic regions. But why? Why did the original Federal Reserve architects in 1914 decide they needed two separate hubs in one state?
The rationale lies right in that historical duality we've been talking about. By 1914, St. Louis was the established financial center for the grain trade and the entire Mississippi River corridor. It served states like Arkansas, parts of Illinois and Kentucky. It managed the older industrial economy.
And Kansas City.
Kansas City had become the absolute undisputed center for the rapidly expanding Western economy cattle, meat packing, and the vast agricultural production of the Great Plains states like Wyoming, Colorado, and Oklahoma. The financial architects recognized that one bank could not adequately oversee the monetary policy and banking needs of two such diverse and sprawling economic empires.
This duality truly cements Missouri's historical role as the nation's central economic pivot point. And to wrap up economics, we have to mention the major corporations historically based there.
Absolutely. The St. Louis area was the longtime headquarters of the historical agricultural biotech giant Monsanto, which was a massive employer and research center until its acquisition by Bayer AG in 2018.
Let's turn to the cultural footprint of Missouri. It is surprisingly significant and incredibly broad, particularly in music and literature, bridging that divide between the South and the Midwest.
The state is nothing less than the birthplace of foundational American musical genres. We are talking about the distinct, syncopated melodies of ragtime, the improvisational complexity of Kansas City jazz, and the raw emotional power of the St. Louis blues.
I mean, think of the giants connected to St. Louis. The rock and roll pioneer, Chuck Berry.
The Queen of Rock, Tina Turner.
The legendary performer Josephine Baker, Sheryl Crow, and modern hip-hop producers like Metro Boomin and the rapper Nelly.
And in ragtime, you can't forget Scott Joplin. He spent crucial years living and composing in Sedalia and St. Louis. And in jazz, Kansas City claims the great Charlie Parker, whose bebop innovations fundamentally reshaped 20th century music.
And it's not just popular music. The St. Louis Symphony Orchestra is the nation's second oldest. That speaks to a deep, long-standing commitment to classical arts. And of course, the Ozarks region hosts Branson, which has become internationally noted for its sheer concentration of music theaters.
The literary contributions are just as profound. Mark Twain, arguably the most important American writer, was a native of Hannibal, Missouri. The Mississippi River setting of his state is immortalized in classics like The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn.
And St. Louis claims three other monumental figures: the groundbreaking regionalist author Kate Chopin, the Nobel laureate poet T.S. Eliot, and the Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Tennessee Williams. That is a truly formidable literary concentration for a single city.
Shifting to sports, Missouri's heritage is rich, dating back to hosting the 1904 Summer Olympics in St. Louis.
And today, the major league presence is strong. You've got the Cardinals and the Royals in MLB, the Chiefs in the NFL, who have become a modern dynasty, the Blues in the NHL, and the newest addition, St. Louis City SC in MLS.
But the emotional core of Missouri sports for generations, it revolved around a rivalry rooted in Civil War blood, the Border War between the University of Missouri-Mizzou and the University of Kansas.
That was the oldest college rivalry west of the Mississippi, directly rooted in the political violence and guerrilla raids of the Civil War era. The intensity was legendary.
It really diminished significantly after Mizzou moved to the Southeastern Conference, the SEC, in 2012. But the historical weight of that conflict is palpable even today.
In terms of heritage preservation, a unique and beautiful site is the St. Genevieve National Historical Park, which protects Missouri's oldest permanent European settlement.
This park is invaluable because it preserves these rare examples of French colonial architecture, particularly the poteau en terre, post-in-ground construction style. It's an isolated, beautifully maintained remnant of that deep French pioneer history that preceded the American settlement and all the conflicts that followed.
From these historical markers and the border war, we see a deep attachment to local and individual identity. Now let's look at how that individualism translates into the policy realm, because this links directly back to that show-me state skepticism. Missouri has a distinctly hands-off approach to regulation.
This is where that stalwart, conservative, non-credulous attitude really manifests in law. It creates a genuinely laissez-faire regulatory climate, particularly regarding personal vices like alcohol and tobacco. For instance, in 2013, the Mercatus Center ranked Missouri third in the nation for alcohol freedom and, astonishingly, first for tobacco freedom.
First in the nation, the alcohol laws are remarkably permissive, and they reveal this deep-seated philosophical stance against government interference in adult personal choice.
Right. Missouri has a history of rejecting intervention. It never enacted statewide prohibition. It has no blue laws regulating Sunday sales. It has low taxes on alcohol and broad retail access. You can buy it virtually everywhere, including drugstores and gas stations.
But the most surprising aspects relate to public behavior.
Well, state law protects persons from arrest or criminal penalty, specifically for public intoxication. It's treated as a non-criminal public health matter. Furthermore, state law contains an explicit exception allowing parents and guardians to serve alcohol to their own children.
Wow, that's a profound reflection of a libertarian viewpoint prioritizing the family unit and individual responsibility over state control.
And the tobacco laws follow the exact same permissive pattern. It shows a consistency in their regulatory philosophy. This is where that skepticism translates into economics. For years, Missouri has held the lowest cigarette excise tax in the entire United States, a mere 17 cents per pack.
Which is incredibly low compared to its neighbors. And the sources show that voters have repeatedly and decisively rejected efforts to raise that tax, even when the revenue was earmarked for specific public works.
This rejection is key. The skepticism here isn't just about politicians. It's about the state distrusting government control, even when linked to public revenue. Their continuous low tobacco tax today and the rejection of statewide prohibition a century ago are two sides of the same skeptical coin. The refusal to let the government dictate personal adult consumption or extract funds through punitive taxation.
And that non-regulatory philosophy extends right into employment law.
Yes, state law explicitly prohibits employers from disadvantaging a person for the lawful use of alcohol or tobacco outside of work hours. It protects off-duty personal choices from employer scrutiny.
Finally, on cannabis laws, Missouri has shown some movement away from total restriction. It proves that the skeptical attitude can be directed toward challenging older laws, too.
Partial decriminalization happened in 2014, making first-time possession of up to 10 grams punishable by a fine rather than jail time. And then in 2018, voters went much further. They approved a constitutional amendment to legalize medical marijuana with a substantial 66% voter approval, establishing a licensing and taxing system. This blend of extreme conservatism on vice taxation alongside voter-driven moves toward medical cannabis perfectly illustrates the complexity of the show-me state's character.
Moving into the modern era, let's look at the demographics and the political landscape. And this reveals deep, persistent geographic divisions. Missouri's population is now over 6.2 million, making it the 19th most populous state.
And over half of those people live in either St. Louis or the Kansas City metropolitan areas. That urbanization is a key demographic factor.
And here's a fun geographic fact that just reinforces its historical centrality. The population center of the entire United States has been in Missouri since 1980. The 2010 census located it near Springfield in Texas County.
Ethnically, German Americans remain a deeply widespread ancestry group, reflecting those massive 19th century migrations. However, modern diversity is heavily concentrated in the urban areas and the southeastern Boot Heel.
African Americans are a substantial population in St. Louis and Kansas City, reflecting the historical settlement patterns of the Civil War era, and also in the Boot Heel region.
And the state has seen significant recent immigration, which is diversifying the cities. Kansas City has growing communities of Latin Americans, particularly from Mexico and Colombia, and immigrants from Africa, like Sudan and Nigeria. And St. Louis is notable for hosting one of the largest Bosnian American communities in the world, largely settled after the conflicts in the Balkans.
And we have to mention the endangered dialect that is a direct link back to its French foundation, Missouri French.
This is a distinct dialect spoken by Creole descendants of those original French pioneers, particularly around St. Genevieve. It developed in complete isolation from both Canadian and Louisiana French varieties. Sadly, our sources indicate it is now nearly extinct, with only a few elderly speakers remaining. It's a critical, fading piece of American linguistic history.
The religious landscape remains overwhelmingly Christian. About 80% of Missourians identify with a religion, and 77% affiliate with Christianity.
The largest denominations are the Southern Baptist Convention, the Roman Catholic Church, and the United Methodist Church. But what stands out is the state's status as a denominational center. That speaks to its long-standing importance in American Protestantism.
Multiple major national and international headquarters are based here. The Lutheran Church Missouri Synod is headquartered in Kirkwood, the United Pentecostal Church International is in Hazelwood, and the Assemblies of God, USA, and Baptist Bible Fellowship International are both based in Springfield.
Springfield, in the southwestern part of the state, is often referred to as a key buckle of the Bible Belt due to its density of denominational leadership in colleges. And we also have to mention Independence, near Kansas City, which holds immense historical and spiritual significance for several Latter-day Saint branches. It serves as the headquarters for the Community of Christ and the Church of Christ, Temple Lot.
Shifting now to politics, Missouri used to have this enviable, almost perfect reputation as the ultimate political bellwether.
It was famous for this status. It voted for the winning presidential candidate from 1904 all the way to 2004, with only one single exception in 1956. This incredible track record made it the quintessential swing state, a genuine microcosm of the national political climate. If you won Missouri, you were virtually guaranteed the presidency.
But the sources reveal that this status has collapsed, completely and dramatically.
Since 2000, Missouri has voted exclusively Republican for president. They even voted against Barack Obama, a candidate from neighboring Illinois, twice. This dramatic shift highlights a profound national realignment, where the old complex center that Missouri represented has fractured into a deeply polarized political landscape.
And the political shift hasn't been narrow or competitive. The margins of victory for Republicans have become substantial 15% or more in recent elections.
And that translates down the ballot entirely. As of early 2023, no Democrats hold any statewide elected position. The former bellwether, the state that once perfectly mirrored the nation, has become a reliably red state, defined by this deep urban-rural divide. Highly Democratic in the core cities and overwhelmingly Republican in the vast expanse of the state between them.
Finally, we have to confront the modern challenges and social tensions that have brought Missouri national attention, specifically the tragic events and unrest that occurred in Ferguson in 2014.
The protests and riots followed the shooting of Michael Brown, and the subsequent investigations conducted by the U.S. Department of Justice, the DOJ, produced complex, often contrasting findings which the sources highlight as central to the ongoing national conversation about race and justice.
The sources outline two distinct investigations. In the specific criminal review of the incident, the DOJ concluded that the police officer legitimately feared for his safety. That was a critical finding in the criminal aspect of the case.
However, in a completely separate and much broader pattern or practice investigation, the DOJ found severe systemic issues within the Ferguson Police Department and the city of Ferguson. This investigation determined that the city was relying on unconstitutional practices, specifically the issuance of excessive fines and disproportionate targeting of black citizens, as a deliberate institutionalized method to balance the municipal budget.
So the DOJ found that the policing and judicial apparatus were essentially operating as a revenue-generating tool, and that created this pervasive environment of systemic discrimination and mistrust.
And this deep-seated discrimination led to the highly unusual and unprecedented step of the NAACP issuing a statewide travel advisory in 2017. It was the first ever covering an entire state, and it cited pervasive racial discrimination in Missouri.
And this advisory was supported by hard data. A 2018 Attorney General report found that African Americans were a striking 85% more likely to be pulled over during traffic stops in 2017 compared to white drivers.
These issues highlight profound, continuing racial disparities and trust deficits that remain central to the state's modern political and social identity. And it demonstrates that the legacies of the Civil War era, the tension between Southern and Northern influence, the urban-rural divide, issues of equity, are far from settled.
So what does this all mean? Our deep dive into Missouri reveals a state truly defined by confluence and by internal tension. It's where the two massive rivers, the Mississippi and the Missouri, meet. Historically, it's where ancient Mississippian culture clashed with European traders, where Southern tradition met Northern migration, and where the devastating nature of the border conflict left a permanent, defining mark.
And economically, its centrality is undeniable. Demonstrated by being the only state with two Federal Reserve banks, requiring financial eyes on both the Western cattle economy and the Eastern industrial and grain economy. Yet this deep-seated status contrasts sharply with its famously skeptical, anti-regulatory, laissez-faire approach to lawmaking regarding everything from alcohol taxation to tobacco control. It's a state that trusts its people to choose, often resulting in some of the most permissive laws in the nation.
This complexity, this constant duality, that defines the show-me state. But let's leave you with one final thought to mull over, connecting the state's foundational philosophy to its ongoing challenges. The official state motto is Salus Populi Suprema Lex Esto, which is Latin for, let the welfare of the people be the supreme law.
Considering Missouri's intense history with internal conflict, the legacy of the Civil War, and the profound disparity found in modern policing and traffic stops. What does this foundational legal principle truly mean in practice today? What is the supreme law when the welfare of the people is experienced so dramatically and tragically differently across demographic and geographic lines? We encourage you to explore the state further, perhaps beginning with the story of St. Genevieve National Historical Park and the surviving influence of its rare French colonial heritage, a tangible reminder of the state's earliest, less conflicted origins.
Until next time, keep digging.